witchy friends, both old and new. Welcome to another Grove lesson. Today we're going to talk about something that you hear in Wicca a lot. It's known as the Threefold Law, sometimes called the Law of Three, the Rule of Three. Some people equate it with karma, the Law of Return. Like the Wiccan Reed, this is another doctrine that is often closely associated to Wicca and touted as if it's always been some kind of central theological doctrine in Wicca. And like with the Wiccan Reed, this is simply not so. And also like with the Wiccan Reed, you should know that the Threefold Law is really something you need to consider. Think about the interpretations. You don't have to blindly embrace it just because you're Wiccan, and you don't have to throw it out just because I said it's not been a staple in Wicca since the beginning. The Threefold Law basically states that whatever you do for good or for bad comes back to you times 3. This was not originally part of Gardner's religion when he was developing what became Wicca. In fact, the only place Gardner mentions anything like this is in a book he wrote of fiction. Gardner wrote High Magic's Aid in 1949, and it was a fictional story, but Gardner was deliberately trying to float some ideas out there in public for those interested in real witchcraft. At the time, the anti-witchcraft laws of his country, the UK, had not been repealed, so this was sort of his sneaky way of trying to slip them in. So there's a lot of realism in this book, and it's set in, well, I should say, some of the beliefs were real as far as what Gardner's Coven was doing. It's set in medieval times, so obviously it's fantasy too, and in the story, the teacher explains to a student that when another witch does something good for you, repay it 3 times. And likewise, if they do bad to you, repay it 3 times. And the teacher says this is the law. Now, there are a couple of problems with that being turned into the Threefold Law as a Wiccan doctrine. First off, this little tidbit never made it out of fiction. Gardner, a few years later, published his first non-fiction book on witchcraft, and he never mentioned it in his Book of Shadows, which was later published. It's just not something that was ever part of the religion. I don't think it was ever meant to be. I think it was fiction. And secondly, in the fiction book, it's not referenced to any kind of natural law of return. They're not talking about, the universe returning your actions magnified. They're talking basically about courtesies between witches and how you should behave as a witch to other practitioners. Somehow that concept in the fiction book got tied in with the Eastern concept of karma, which is actually a little different from the Threefold Law. Karma is a Sanskrit word that translates roughly to mean action. The idea is that everything is connected and everything affects everything else, so your actions have consequences. But karma, in the traditional Eastern philosophy sense, refers to reincarnation. When you think good thoughts and perform good deeds, you'll be reborn in a happier circumstance. And on the flip side, if you think bad thoughts and perform bad deeds, you will be born into crappier circumstances. It closely ties in with the caste system of Hinduism, which is why that system continues to be perpetuated. The idea is that you're born into the caste you deserve based on your past lives. Born into a lower caste, it's your own fault. Blame yourself, not the government, not the wealthy people, not society. You're born into a higher caste, hey, congratulations, you must have deserved it. Good for you. Westerners began latching on to the idea of instant karma. They often take out the whole idea of rebirth and karma guiding where you will be reborn, and instead insert instant consequences. So if you do good deeds, you're rewarded now. If not, well, karma's a bitch, right? Karma will get you. Since Gardner and his religion were influenced by Eastern philosophies, there's always been that sense of we are all strands on the web, everything affects everything else. And Wiccans also tend to embrace reincarnation as a way of life, so karma was a natural fit. And the Threefold Law popularized in Wicca and tied up with the whole thing in about the 1970s. Like the read, it was embraced by eclectic Wiccans. But even among Wiccans, there is no automatic agreement on it as a philosophy. So let's look at a few different interpretations of the Threefold Law, and I want you to think for yourself. Don't take any of these as law, okay? Some people see the Threefold Law as the universal bitch slap. You do bad, the universe sends 3 times as bad back to you. You do good, you get 3 times in reward from the universe. And some even see this reward or punishment as doled out by the gods. And this tends to fit in line with the philosophies of those raised in, say, Christian religions and cultures where you're ingrained with the idea that it's a deity's job to reward your actions or punish them. Only instead of heaven versus hell, it's payback in this life or perhaps in the next life. I'm not really sure that this flies well with Wiccan theology. I guess it depends on how you view the divine or on your view of if there's objective right and wrong out there that the universe would be able to recognize. Does intent matter only, or are we punished for our mistakes as well? See, there's a lot to think about and lots to debate, but it's one interpretation. That there are rules and some higher force or power is holding us accountable on some great big cosmic scoreboard. It doesn't necessarily have to be the gods, though. It could just be energy that you're sending into the universe, like the law of attraction in a way. What are you attracting into your life? Negative thoughts or behaviors can attract negativity. Positive thoughts and behaviors can attract positive things. Another way of interpreting the Threefold Law is in seeing it more as a poetic way of pointing out cause and effect. How you act is going to largely determine what happens to you or what you bring into your life. Like a good person is most likely going to attract other good people and thus good things into his life, while a bad person will probably have to wallow in his own crap once in a while. Do bad things and you put yourself in a hole and you'll have to dig yourself out, right? You steal, you might get arrested. You borrow and don't pay back the loan, your credit gets ruined, you can't buy the house, you have to pay the loan back with extra interest. So cause and effect. Not necessarily any force in the universe devising ways to specifically reward or punish you. It's just that you reap what you sow, to borrow a phrase. If you take care of your garden, you get nice harvest veggies, and if you ignore it, you get a bunch of weeds and pests and rotten veggies. Natural outcomes that basically you bring on yourself. And we can also argue about this because sometimes, at least it seems to me, that things don't really work out that way. Sometimes no matter how hard you work, even when you're doing all the right things and you're doing your best, the crap hits the fan for you. You know, your garden gets invaded by locusts or something. It wasn't your fault. And sometimes it seems that people do get away with bad behavior. They don't suffer the consequences. I mean, we all have good and bad stuff in our lives all the time, but sometimes there are just really bad people, and it doesn't look like they always have negative consequences that correspond very well to the amount of bad that they've done. Some people do get off without paying back the loan, or they do something without getting punished. Maybe they do get punished when we don't realize it, but sometimes it doesn't seem that way. Sometimes it feels like it's not as clean cut. Some would argue that times 3 part, like where did the multiplication come from? That's certainly debatable. Is that really just misreading of Gardner's do good 3 times to fellow witches who do good to you, or something else? I mean, I know 3 is seen as a mystical number, and people often believe that things will happen in 3s, particularly bad things like deaths, but there are those who argue the whole multiplication factor. Some dismiss it, some say it depends on the action. Some, I've heard, think the multiplication is even higher than 3. I've heard 3 times 3. Some people completely dismiss the threefold law. Doreen Valiente, Gardner's High Priestess, I've mentioned her before. She was asked about it in an interview in it was the late 80s, early 90s. And she called it poppycock. And she said she didn't believe it. And she's known as the mother of Wicca, so I guess she knows what she's talking about. I don't think she was denying that actions have consequences, but I do think she was specifically referring to any universal law. That threefold bitch slap specifically meant to punish us like spanking bad children. So the threefold law, like the reed, take it or leave it, but you should know where it actually came from and its actual place in Wicca. And when it comes down to it, it should at least leave you with one question. If Wicca's ethics and morality didn't come from the reed or the threefold law, where did they come from? That is a lesson for next time. For now, please comment below. Comments really help me because YouTube algorithms love engagement, so they help my channel. And I'd really like to hear from you and how you interpret the threefold law, if you place any importance on it in your own spiritual path, or overall what you think of these lessons. If you don't want to comment, I understand. Please just give me a like, a little thumbs up if you like this video. Share if you think someone else might like it. And if you want to hear more of our lessons, subscribe and ring the bell for notification. Don't forget to head on over to the Groves Facebook page where you can find our discussions, assignments, and more. Until next time, thank you for watching. I hope yours is a magical day.